Hi, this is a video or a series of videos about how to listen to music and some basic musical terminology so we can describe what we're hearing. I want you to understand one thing as we get started with this series of videos. First of all the other videos that you've seen that involve me were done by a professional videographer, Ian Becker, who is a wonderful, wonderful man and extremely talented. This one I'm doing on my own. So you can expect somewhat lower quality from this, but I hope we can still communicate the basic ideas. So if there are technical issues with this one, please blame me and not Ian. Let's talk a little bit about how to listen to music. We don't usually think about that because we're not usually aware of it. And we have so much music going on in our lives that we're not even aware that it's playing sometimes. But there are times when we really want to listen to what's going on in a piece of music and pay attention to it. And this is something I refer to as active listening. Don't just have music on in the background when we're talking about these works. Sit down and actually pay attention to them, hear what's going on. This requires somewhat more focused attention than our culture is used to. And if your mind wanders a little bit during the process, don't worry. That happens all the time to everybody. And it's okay, just get back into it as soon as you can. But the effort of focusing your attention on a piece of music rewards itself because you get more enjoyment out of the things that you find, especially on repeated hearings. So here are the things, the basic things to listen for. Music is something that occurs in time, and it's something that occurs usually without words. Or if there is a song, for example, that has words, that and the music are happening simultaneously, and they may agree, they may mean the same thing, they may mean different things, but music is a separate thing from text, and it happens without the need of text. There is obviously such a thing as instrumental music as well. So the fact that it occurs in time and that it is mostly nonverbal, and also you can't like stop it and look at it like you would a piece of art. You can't follow it in the same way that you would a theatrical work where you have words and actions on stage to follow. So instead, when you're listening to music, you need to realize that a lot of how you process music functions is a function of memory. And that's one of those wonderful gifts that God gave us. And we'll talk a little bit more about how memory functions. But one of the sets of things you can listen for, questions you can ask yourself as you're listening is, what repeats? What changes? What doesn't repeat? What's different? At any point in music, a composer or musician has three choices. You can repeat what you've been doing. You can, in other words, you can copy something, okay? You can do the same thing but change it somehow. That's called variation or transformation. Or you can contrast something and do something new. This is also sometimes called combining. And here's a video that I found on a website called Everything is a Remix, which I love, that shows a little bit about those basic ideas. You see the copy image toward the left of the screen, and then the idea of taking something and transforming it or changing it in the middle, and then combining the original idea with new stuff. So that's maybe a graphic illustration of the basic elements of creativity, the choices that any artist or musician has at any point in the work of art. Now, the other thing about listening to music is that often people, when I'm talking with them about listening to music, we have all sorts of images that come through our minds. And those images and associations that music suggests to you are absolutely fine, like a ship on the sea, or sunshine, or a love story, or clowns, or something like that. That's absolutely fine, but remember that may or may not be what the original intent of the music was. That may be something that's unique to you, so we'll talk about that. Just remember that not everybody may have the same images that you do. Lastly, be curious about unfamiliar music and be patient. If something is not familiar to you, consider that to be okay, or at least consider the possibility that that might be okay. and maybe get to know a piece of music like you would a person. Wait to decide whether or not you like something. So even if something sounds unfamiliar to you, don't turn it off right away. Get curious about it and wait until you've heard it a few times to decide whether or not you like it. Just about every musician has an experience that they could tell you about of a piece of music that they absolutely hated at first, and then now they, after a repeated experience with it, they've come to love it. So be patient as you listen. Let's talk a little bit now about how music communicates, or at least some basic ideas of how music communicates. First of all, as we said a moment ago, music is temporal. It exists in time, and it is bound up in time. It depends on the brain's capacity to remember and compare things. To remember and compare things. See what I did there? You heard that I repeated that phrase, and it wasn't just déjà vu, and your brain recognized those words and alerted you to that fact. Sometimes it's only an interruption in the process of what we expect that gets us to pay attention to something, and some music is about that. There are no real clear understandings. We don't know exactly why music can make us laugh or weep or dance or feel celebratory. We don't know why music moves our feelings. There are some theories about it, but none of them seems to explain the process completely. So really all we can do is kind of talk around musical processes, and that's what we're going to try and do. One of the most popular theories, though, is that music creates patterns as it goes, and we'll talk about those patterns, and that our brains try to complete those patterns if they're incomplete, and we try to compare events to one another and build patterns in our minds as we go. And if a pattern is left incomplete, then that creates a need for us to complete that pattern, and sometimes actually delaying the process of completing that pattern can create a sense of emotion. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you are walking up a set of stairs in the dark at night, and you feel the steps underneath your feet. You know where the steps are, but then you come to where you expect a step, and maybe the step's not there or something else is different. That's a surprise, and that creates emotion, unpleasant emotion in this case. But a lot of music may be about creating and then either delaying or frustrating even that particular expectation. This is called the constructivist viewpoint, and that there's a lot to be said about that. Here's a little bit of a video of the singer and conductor, musician, composer Bobby McFerrin doing a little demonstration of how expectation works in music at a science conference from a few years ago.
Talking about expectations. Watch. Ba, ba. Okay. da ba 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 da 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 ba ba ba. Yeah. Now, what's interesting to me about that is, regardless of where I am, anywhere, every audience gets that.
But
It doesn't matter, you know, that's just, you know, the pentatonic scale for some reason.
if you're looking for a job in neuroscience, I think
Okay, that was Bobby McFerrin. He's one of my favorite musicians, so I was just looking for an opportunity to use this video. Another theory about how music affects us is that somehow music manages to model emotions, or the way the emotions flow in our minds. This is very, very little understood, and so, you know, there's a lot of speculation about it. You can read about it if you want. There's another theory that the idea of association or pictorialism or imitation, for example, is the source of meaning in music. But music is so rarely imitative of something else. Although, you know, if you can think of, for example, how music inspires physical gestures, for example, there's a melody that'll go wow or something like that, then that's a possibility. One last word before we start talking about elements particularly, a little bit on terminology. Since music happens in time, it is ephemeral, it's transitory, and it isn't dependent on text, and it isn't something we can touch or hold. It's hard to describe. So sometimes we use words that are analogies, like describing texture in music. What does texture in music mean? Well, it's a way we can try and describe music in some sort of kinesthetic way. Or we talk about musical color. Musicians talk about color all the time. Obviously, we're not talking about visual color unless you've got really full-on synesthesia. But the terms that I'm about to describe to you are indeed the standard ones for musicians. So go on to the next video. We'll talk a little bit about time and rhythm.